This lecture deals with the Manifest Destiny period in United States history that kind of wraps up period 4. So when we left off, Jackson was kind of leaving the presidency as a lot of these other issues are going on around the presidency, and he leaves with some significant failures. There's a growing social stratification where there's a gap between rich and poor was visibly widening. So even though he was the common man's president, he doesn't really help the common man. His actions actually help the rich significantly more so than the poor who he was supposed to represent. And his financial policies and the destruction of the National Bank will help lead to the Panic of 1837, which is a serious depression that lasted until 1843. It's actually the worst depression the country faces until the Great Depression of the 20th century. So we also leave with two kind of new political parties. Out of the Democratic Republicans, who Jackson kind of changes into just strictly Democrats, we get the Democrats. They believe in states' rights and the federal restraining economy and social affairs, so the federal government shouldn't be too powerful. Opposed economic expansion, corporate charters, paper money. They wanted more agricultural. They distrusted of concentrated economic power and moral coercion, which they mostly saw in the North. The Democrats are mostly going to take over the South. They tended to lean pro-slavery, as they were mostly Southern and Western party, and they will protect the common man, so kind of picking up where both Jefferson and Jackson leave off. The new party really is the Whigs, which will kind of be the newest version of the Federalists. They wanted a strong national government. They favored the Bank of the United States, protective tariffs, all the things that the Federalists had wished for. They support public schools and moral reforms such as prohibition of liquor and abolition of slavery. So we see a little bit of a different divide here. And they believe that the best and the privileged should run the government. So we have two major new political parties that will lead us really up to the Civil War. So Jackson will handpick his successor, a man named Martin Van Buren, and he will win the 1836 presidential election. He wins by both popular and electoral votes. So you can see the Democratic Party is definitely significantly more spread out and the more respected party at this point in history. You can see that there's also 3 different Whig candidates, which hurts them because they split the votes. So if they had maybe backed one of those candidates, they might have been able to compete better with Van Buren, but they're a new party, so they don't necessarily do that. And you can see there's different factions of the Whig Party all over the country. So what is Martin Van Buren's presidency kind of shaped by? He's elected in 1836. He does not really appeal to the common people, even though he is a Democrat. He takes office just weeks before the American credit system collapsed in the Panic of 1837. It's blamed on the Democrats and Van Buren specifically. It wasn't his fault, but he is there when it happens. So again, had we had a national bank or a Federal Reserve, we could have done some things economically to lessen the strain of the panic. Maybe not stop it, but maybe have it last less long and be less severe. That is done away with by Jackson. That's something that Martin Van Buren really has to kind of pick up the slack for. So in reaction to this, he creates an independent treasury. Treasury branches would accept and pay out only in gold and silver coin. They didn't accept paper currency from state banks. So this is kind of an anti-democratic thing. It's not a national bank, but it's a step towards it to help lighten the load from the Panic of 1837. And it's going to cost him in the next election because a lot of Democratic people were saying, well, you kind of gave up on your values and you did not really appeal to the common man. So after Andrew Jackson, we really get this period of not so significant presidents for the most part between 1836 and 1860. So in 1840, with the election, we have these hard times from the Panic of 1837, and the Whigs get some confidence in that. They had just had to blame the Democrats for the Depression. It worked, and they rallied behind a single candidate, William Henry Harrison. He was a former military general, so he has some respect there. It was a people's crusade against the aristocrats in the palace. So again, the Whigs kind of pick up the common man thing away from the Democrats. He woos supporters with huge rallies and parades and songs and all these different things, so the Whigs are triumphant. He is very insignificant, though, because during his inaugural address, it is very cold, he doesn't wear a jacket, and he will catch pneumonia and die only about 30 days into his presidency. You're starting to see, though, a little bit more cohesion with the electoral map. Most of the Whigs are going to be in the north, most of the Democrats are going to be in the south, and that is going to harden and harden as we get closer to the Civil War. So even though he is a Whig and they wanted kind of a national bank, he repeals the independent treasury that Martin Van Buren had put in place. He catches pneumonia and dies, and again, his successor is a man named John Tyler. He's the first vice president to move up to the presidency after the death of a president, and he's kind of going to show his lack of expertise and lack of preparation. So he is kind of a different type of Whig. He was a little bit too close to the Democrats for most of the Whigs, and he opposes the party's congressional agenda. He repeatedly vetoes Henry Clay, who was kind of a prominent Whig at the time, his tariffs, and it blocks attempts to revive the Bank of the United States, even though his party wanted it. His entire cabinet resigns, and he became a president without a party and was not going to be elected again. So he kind of serves out William Henry Harrison's term, and that's about it. So throughout this period, we're having more areas annexed. Florida was annexed in 1819, 1821 after Andrew Jackson kind of wins it for us. And as we got the Louisiana Purchase, those areas are starting to become territories and eventually states. In 1821, Missouri becomes a state, and Maine becomes a state in 1820, keeping that balance of power with the Missouri Compromise. And we said that slavery could not be allowed above that 3630 line. What is going to happen, however, is after the Mexicans declare independence from the Spanish, we will eventually go to war with Mexico. All that territory, that is, most of it is actually above the 3630 line, so we're going to have to kind of revise the Missouri Compromise a little bit later. So after the War of 1812, around 1820 or later, we start to have this feeling of manifest destiny, the idea of expansion, and it is our destiny, that God has chosen America to expand. It goes back to the city upon a hill belief, and that's kind of what replaces that for the next part of American history. We should control the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We're better than all the other either European or South American countries that could control it. We should control it because we are the best version of humanity. So with that idea in mind, we are moving west, even past the Louisiana Territory, into areas which will eventually become Texas. The Mexican government, now an independent country after kicking out the Spanish, allowed Americans to live in the area that would eventually be Texas, and they basically wanted them to come, cultivate it, make some money off of it, and would help the Mexican government. The only requirements were that they become Mexican citizens and not to practice slavery. They bring their slaves, however, because if they were going to make any money in Texas, they were going to need that slave labor to do so. So as they move to Texas with their slaves, these empresarios start to rebel against the Mexican government, specifically the rules on slavery, and they felt that their rights had been violated. Eventually, they win a section of Texas, which will become the Republic of Texas. It is an independent country from 1836 to 1845, because they had to give up their American citizenship, so they're not Americans. They obviously granted themselves independence from Mexico, so we have kind of a third country right in the middle between the United States and Mexican territory. What is going to happen is obviously these American citizens, so they start pushing for, being annexed into the whole country of the United States, and that will eventually happen in 1845. So as they become an independent country, they give Sam Houston the presidency of the Republic of Texas. Mexico never recognizes their independence, though, because they felt that it was they were not able to kind of secede from the Mexican government. The Texans decide to apply to become a state. President Jackson and Van Buren refused to recognize their statehood because of the issues around slaves, because we would be adding another state to the country that would obviously be a slave state. So we'd have to have a second area to add as a free state if we were ever going to do that. So Texas remains independent for a period of time here. So Tyler, in the last days of his presidency, proposes the annexation of Texas. Britain actively opposes it because they still own areas of Canada and then what will become the northwest portion of the United States. The vote is close and divided along sectional lines because of the issue of slavery. Eventually it's passed in 1845, and Texas is admitted as a slave state in 1845. That will not be the end of the issues with Texas, however. So kind of going on along a little bit after this, gold is discovered in 1849 in California in the area of San Francisco, hence the reason the football team is called the San Francisco 49ers. So there's a mass migration out to the areas of California, even though it's not ours. It's still Mexican territory or even independent territory at this point. So we're going to have a new area that we are going to kind of claim as Americans, even though it's not really ours. So not only are we moving to the southwest in Texas and in California, we're also moving to the northwest where Oregon fever hits, and people see this as, you know, a great opportunity to make money. Many take the famous Oregon Trail in 1841. So we're moving into areas. This is more an issue with the English than the Mexicans, but we're moving into areas that really aren't ours. Now they're not very populated areas by either the English or the Mexicans, but they're still not owned by us. So we're going to kind of run into some issues with these two countries. So as you can see, this Oregon territory encompasses not only present-day United States with Oregon and Washington, but also areas of Canada. Now, so it's disputed as to who owns this. What Americans start pushing for is we say that we should own all of this, so it should go up to that most extreme U.S. claim, 54-40. And the kind of catchphrase of this becomes 54-40 or fight. And it becomes the rallying cry of American expansionists. We deserve all of this, again, because of that manifest destiny thing. Britain, it's not the most significant piece of land, but they're not looking to give it to us for free. So we're eventually going to compromise on that 49th parallel as the northernmost border of the United States and Canada. So that kind of concludes Manifest Destiny for period 4. We are going to continue where we make an agreement with the with the English to declare the northern border of the United States, and we are going to have that Mexican-American War, which expands our country, but also expands the issue of slavery and the issues leading to the Civil War, which we will talk about in period 5.